The Amazon rainforest is never truly quiet. It is a constant wall of sound. The electric buzz of cicadas, the distant scream of howler monkeys, the snap of hardwood expanding in the heat. To a civilian, it is just noise. To Captain Marcus, it is an alarm system. When the forest goes silent, it means a predator has arrived. It had been 3 days since Marcus began following one of the coordinates noted in the dead pilot's logbook. The location was miles from his shack, in a region of igapos, flooded forests, that dried out at this time of year, revealing ancient trails used by rubber tappers a century ago. He wasn't looking for treasure. He was looking to understand the battle space. In war, the map is the most important weapon. Max walked 5 yards ahead. The German shepherd moved with the energy economy of an animal that knows heat kills faster than bullets. Suddenly, the dog's rhythm changed. His ears, always rotating like independent radar dishes, locked onto a point to the left of the trail. His tail stopped wagging. Marcus froze. He watched the dog. Max wasn't growling at an animal. He was tasting the air with his muzzle raised, testing the breeze. He looked back at Marcus and took a single step backward, pressing his body low to the ground. The body language was clear. Something wrong. Something human. Marcus advanced in a crouch, his machete in his right hand, his left hand touching the ground to feel for vibrations. The air was stagnant. And then he smelled it. It wasn't the smell of natural decay. It was a sickly sweet, chemical, cheap odor. Raw tobacco mixed with industrial insect repellent and sour sweat. He reached the spot where Max had stopped. The dog indicated a crushed fern bush. Marcus pushed the leaves aside with the tip of his machete. There, in the damp mud that hadn't yet dried under the morning sun, was a footprint. It wasn't an indigenous print, nor was it a local fisherman's flip-flop. It was the deep, aggressive tread of a tactical boot. A Vibram sole, size 11, dug deep at the heel. Whoever passed here was carrying weight, and he wasn't alone. Marcus tracked the pattern with his eyes. There were 2 other sets of heavy boot prints beside it. 3 men. Heavy, clumsy. They didn't care about noise discipline or leaving a trail. It was the arrogance of men who think they own the place. But it was the 4th mark that made Marcus's blood run cold. Weaving between the brutal boot prints was a small footprint. A bare foot, the size of a child or a teenager. The impression was light, almost imperceptible, except for the depth of the toes in the mud. The toes were dug deep into the earth. Whoever made that print was running for their life. Marcus analyzed the crime scene drawn in the dirt. The small footprint zigzagged. The heavy boots cut straight lines, crushing the vegetation. It was a hunt. He looked in the direction of the tracks. They were heading north, into a box canyon area where the river made a sharp, dangerous bend. Max let out a low, almost inaudible whine, staring in the same direction. The dog could smell the fear impregnated in those small prints. The strange thing, Marcus thought, was the silence. If this were a standard pursuit, there would be shouting. There would be the sounds of capture. But the bush was mute. The victim wasn't screaming. There was no sound of crying echoing through the trees. Just the heavy silence of a mute persecution. Marcus checked his watch. The clay on the edge of the boot print was still wet, water seeping in slowly. Less than 20 minutes. They were close. The ex-SEAL sheathed his machete and unslung the 12-gauge shotgun from his back. He checked the chamber. Heavy buckshot. The reconnaissance mission was over. The rescue mission had begun. He gave a hand signal to Max. Hunt. The dog understood. He lowered his profile, transforming into a shadow, hugging the ground, and moved out. Marcus followed, his footsteps vanishing in the soft earth. He didn't run. He flowed through the jungle. The prey was running in desperation. The hunters were right behind her. But what the three men in combat boots didn't know was that, in that moment, they had just been demoted in the food chain. The first rule of survival in the jungle is simple. Whoever sees first, lives. Marcus knew this. That was why the last 200 yards of their approach hadn't been a hike. They were an exercise in absolute stealth. He and Max moved upwind, using the natural sound of the breeze in the leaves to mask the noise of their own boots. The smell of cheap cigarettes grew stronger, now mixed with the metallic scent of gun oil and stale sweat. They were close. Marcus made a low signal with his left hand. Max stopped immediately, freezing in an alert posture, body lowered among the ferns. The dog didn't need to see to know what was ahead. His nose had already drawn a map of the threat. Marcus crawled the last few feet to the edge of a ridge covered in exposed roots. He slowly pushed aside a branch of apui and looked down. The clearing opened up before him like a stage set for a macabre play. There they were, the owners of the heavy boots. There were three men. They didn't look like common miners, who are usually thin and worn down by malaria. These were well-fed men, carrying the physical arrogance of those used to intimidating others. They wore camouflage mixed with civilian clothes, the standard uniform of paramilitaries or security for narco routes. The first man, the tallest one, was sitting on a fallen log, cleaning his nails with a long combat knife. An automatic pistol rested in a drop-leg holster on his thigh. The second man was standing, smoking, with an old submachine gun, maybe an Uzi or an MT-12, slung lazily over his shoulder. The third was closer to the water's edge, laughing at something the other had said. And then Marcus saw the target of the hunt. Pressed against the tabular roots of a giant kapok tree, trying to merge with the bark, was the girl. She was small, maybe 14 or 15, with striking indigenous features and long, messy black hair. Her clothes were torn by the thorns from her flight. She was muddy, her bare feet bleeding. But what froze Marcus's blood wasn't the dirt, nor the wounds. It was the silence. The men were laughing loudly, breaking the sanctity of the forest. They spoke in Spanish mixed with border slang, mocking the little rabbit who ran so far for nothing. They were playing with their food. The girl, surrounded, didn't scream. She didn't beg for help. She didn't cry out. Her eyes, black and wide with absolute terror, darted from one man to the other. But her mouth was sealed. It was the silence of deep shock. Or perhaps, the veteran thought with a tightening chest, the silence of someone who has seen so much horror she knows screaming is useless. Marcus retreated his face into the shadows. He felt bile rise in his throat. The rage, that old acquaintance from his past life, lit up like a match in gasoline. He wanted to stand up. He wanted to unload the 12 gauge into the chest of the man with the knife and watch his smile vanish in a red mist. He wanted to release Max and let the dog tear the throat out of the second one. But anger is a stupid advisor. The veteran took a deep breath, forcing tactical coldness to take control. He analyzed the scenario. Distance, 30 yards. Hostiles, 3. Weaponry, pistol, submachine gun, knife, and likely another weapon on the third man. Victim, total risk zone. If Marcus fired now, he would drop one. Max would get the second, but the third would have plenty of time to pull a trigger on the girl, even if just out of reflex or pure malice. Or worse, they could use the girl as a human shield. A direct confrontation was a death sentence for her. Max, beside Marcus, felt the tension radiating from the veteran. The dog looked at the men down there with focused hate. A growl began to form in the animal's throat, but Marcus placed a hand firmly on his neck. "Stay," Marcus whispered, the sound just a breath. "Not yet." He needed to change the geometry of the fight. He needed to separate the men from the girl. He needed them to move, to break that triangular formation that kept her cornered. Marcus watched the man with the knife stand up. He walked toward the girl, making an obscene gesture with the blade. The girl shrank back further, closing her eyes, trembling but without making a single sound. Time was running out. They were done playing hunter. Now they were going to start something else. Marcus looked at the bush surrounding the clearing. The wind was blowing from the north. There was a patch of dry bamboo to the right of the bandits. There was the creek water to the left. He couldn't be a soldier right now. He had to be a ghost. He had to create a terror so great, so inexplicable, that those men would forget the girl and look into the darkness. Marcus crawled backward, breaking the line of sight. He looked at Max and pointed to the right, toward the invaders' blind flank. The most dangerous game of chess of his life was beginning. If he made one wrong move, the silent girl would pay with her life. Separating from your K9 in a hot zone feels like taking off your body armor in the middle of a firefight. You feel naked. But the veteran knew that Max was more lethal when he was off leash. With a final hand signal, 2 fingers pointing toward the dry bamboo patch and then a closed fist signifying stay, Marcus sent his partner into the darkness. Max vanished. There was no rustling of leaves, no snapping of twigs. The German shepherd simply evaporated into the dense vegetation, merging his dark sable coat with the afternoon shadows. He knew the drill. He would circle the clearing, position himself behind the man sitting on the log, and wait for the command that would transform his iron discipline into pure violence. Marcus was alone. He needed to deal with the primary threat. The man with the knife was a sadist, but the man with the submachine gun was the tactical problem. If the shooting started, that automatic weapon could sweep the clearing in 2 seconds, killing the girl before she could even blink. That was the priority target. Marcus crawled through the mud, flanking the clearing on the side opposite to Max, heading toward the creek. The fetid mangrove mud covered his arms and face, serving as improvised camouflage. He moved with the patience of an anaconda, inch by inch, controlling his breathing so the air didn't hiss through his teeth. Down below, the situation was degrading fast. "Let's see if she really is mute," the man with the knife said, grabbing the girl's arm and hauling her up with a violent jerk. The girl stumbled, falling to her knees. She opened her mouth in a silent scream of pain, eyes filled with tears, but no sound came out. Her silence seemed to irritate the men even more. Fear that makes no noise is disturbing. It doesn't feed the aggressor's ego. "Leave her, Paco. We take her to the camp. The boss pays more if she's unbroken," the man with the machine gun said. He was the smoker. He looked bored, leaning against a tree, his weapon hanging loosely around his neck. Fatal error. Marcus reached his position. He was now 15 yards from the smoker, hidden behind a high tabular root. He had a clean line of fire, but he still couldn't shoot. The third man, the one laughing near the water, was too close to the girl. If Marcus dropped the smoker, the third man would grab the girl. He needed to separate them. He needed a distraction that would make them look away from her. Marcus felt around on the ground and found a smooth, heavy river stone the size of an orange. He calculated the trajectory. He didn't throw the rock at the men. He hurled it hard to the opposite side, deep into the dry bamboo patch where Max was not hiding. The stone sailed over the clearing and hit the hollow bamboo stalks with a loud, sharp crack. Crack thump. The sound was unnatural. It sounded like a heavy boot snapping a dry branch. In the clearing, the effect was immediate. The 3 men froze. The man with the knife let go of the girl's arm. The smoker pushed off the tree, his hand going to the grip of his submachine gun. "What was that?" the third man asked, drawing a pistol from his waistband. "Came from over there, the bush." the smoker said, pointing his weapon at the bamboo. "Probably an animal, tapir or pig." "Go check it," the man with the knife ordered. "I don't want surprises." Marcus's plan worked. The man with the machine gun, the biggest threat, began to walk toward the noise, moving away from the girl and the other two. He was entering the kill box, isolating himself. The third man, the one with the pistol, also took a few steps in that direction, curious, leaving the leader with the knife alone with the girl. The triangular formation had broken. Now they were a dispersed line. Marcus saw movement in the leaves on the far side of the clearing, where Max was hidden. He saw only the wet glint of an amber eye and the tip of an ear. The dog was ready. He was just waiting for the audio cue. The man with the machine gun reached the edge of the bush. He kicked a shrub. Nothing here, just wind. He turned his back to the jungle to speak to his cohorts. It was the last mistake of his life. Marcus raised the 12-gauge shotgun. The iron sights aligned with the torso of the man turning away, but the veteran didn't shoot. The roar of the shotgun would alert the others instantly. He needed chaos first. Marcus brought 2 fingers to his mouth and let out a whistle, not a human whistle. He mimicked the sharp, terrifying screech of a harpy eagle, a sound that cut through the humid afternoon air like a razor. It was the password. On the other side of the clearing, the shadow behind the knife man took shape and grew teeth. The screech of the harpy eagle still hung in the humid air, a dissonant note that made the 3 men pause. The human brain is wired to identify patterns, and that sound, while natural, had the wrong timing. It was in that microscopic interval of cognitive confusion, the split second where the prey tries to understand if the noise is the wind or death, that their sentence was executed. From the dry bamboo patch to the right of the leader holding the knife, the explosion of movement didn't look like an animal. It looked like the jungle itself had decided to attack. Max didn't bark. Untrained dogs bark to intimidate. War dogs bite to neutralize. The German Shepherd covered the 10 yards separating him from the target in 3 massive bounds, his body low to the ground to maximize aerodynamics and minimize the target profile. The man with the knife, the one named Paco, only had time to turn his head. He saw a gray and black blur, white teeth, and eyes that held nothing domestic. The impact was brutal. 80 pounds of canine muscle, accelerated to 30 miles per hour, collided with the man's chest with the force of a sledgehammer. The sound of the air being driven from Paco's lungs was audible across the clearing, a wet, painful gasp. He was thrown backward, landing flat on his back in the mud, the knife flying from his hand and spinning through the air before splashing harmlessly into the creek water. Before he could raise his arms to protect himself, Max was on him. The dog didn't go for the throat to kill. He went for the shoulder and bicep, the tactical containment bite. The canines tore through the fabric of the camouflage shirt and sank into the meat. Paco screamed, a high, terrible sound that shattered the peace of the afternoon. On the other side of the clearing, the man with the machine gun, the smoker, spun on his heels at the sound of the scream. His attention was instantly sucked toward the scene of the dog attacking his boss. He raised his weapon, finger moving to the trigger, his mouth open in shock. It was the mistake Marcus was waiting for. Tunnel vision. The man focused on the loud threat and forgot to check his 6. Marcus emerged from behind the tabular root like a specter covered in mud. He didn't run with a clumsy gait. He advanced with long, silent strides, closing the 15-foot gap in 2 seconds. He didn't use his trigger finger. A shot at that range would cause unnecessary damage and noise. Marcus used the weapon as a combat baton. He gripped the shotgun by the barrel and the stock, using it as a lever. The polymer stock inscribed a short, violent arc in the air. The strike connected with the side of the smoker's head, right above the ear. It wasn't a killing blow, but a system shutdown. The man's knees buckled instantly, as if his bones had turned to water. He collapsed, the submachine gun falling from his limp hands and sinking into the soft earth. Marcus kicked the weapon away in a fluid motion, never stopping his advance. Now only the third man remained, the one with the pistol. He was in the middle of the clearing, paralyzed by the chaos. To his right, his boss was being mauled by a wolf. To his left, his partner had just dropped like a sack of potatoes, felled by a shape that looked made of clay and fury. Panic took over. His training, if he had any, evaporated. He drew the pistol from his waistband, but his hands shook so badly he could barely hold the grip. He spun, pointing the gun randomly, first at the dog, then at the jungle, then at the girl. The girl. She was still there, pressed against the tree. Her eyes were squeezed shut, hands covering her ears, curled in a fetal position. She was the fragile point in this triangle of violence. If the man with the pistol fired in panic, a stray bullet could find her. Marcus knew he couldn't sprint to him in time. He was 40 feet away. He needed to shock the man's nervous system. He needed to be scarier than the dog and more dangerous than the situation. Marcus raised the shotgun to his shoulder. The sound he made next was calculated to freeze the blood in anyone's veins. He racked the slide of the pump action. The mechanical clack-clack was loud and distinct. That sound is universal. In any language, in any culture, the sound of a 12-gauge being cycled means imminent death. The man with the pistol froze. He whipped his head toward the source of the sound. What he saw wasn't a police officer. He saw a towering figure, coated in gray swamp mud, with eyes that burned with predatory intensity, pointing a thick, dark barrel directly at the center of his chest. Marcus didn't look like a hero. He looked like a swamp monster. "Suelo! Al suelo! Ahora!" Marcus roared the order in Spanish, the lingua franca of the border. His voice projected from the diaphragm with the authority of a man who has commanded troops in combat. It wasn't a request. It was a force of nature. The man with the pistol looked at Marcus, then at Max, who had stopped biting and was now snarling on top of the fallen leader's chest, dripping blood and fury, and made the only rational decision of his miserable life. He opened his hands. The pistol fell into the mud with a dull thud. He raised his arms and fell to his knees, sobbing. "No, me mates! Por favor! No, me mates!" The thug cried out. The combat had lasted less than 12 seconds. The web was woven, and the spider had just pulled the string. Adrenaline pulsed in Marcus's veins, making the world look brighter, sharper. He kept the weapon trained on the kneeling man, but his eyes swept the clearing in 360 degrees. Check 6, rear guard, flanks. Anyone else? Nothing. Just the sound of the defeated men gasping for air and the low weeping of the man who surrendered. Marcus advanced to the kneeling man and delivered a controlled kick to his shoulder, knocking him face first into the dirt. He stepped on the man's back, pinning him, while keeping the weapon ready. "Max, Platz!" Marcus commanded. "Down, stay." Max obeyed instantly. He stepped off the wounded leader, who was moaning, clutching his shredded arm, and lay down in a guard position, watching the 3 prisoners with a look that promised more pain if they moved. The clearing, which minutes before had been a stage for cowardly cruelty, was now under new management. Marcus looked at the girl. She opened her eyes slowly. She saw the 3 men who had hunted her lying down, bleeding or surrendered. And she saw the mudman and the wolf dog who had appeared from nowhere. She didn't run. She didn't smile. She just looked at Marcus with an unreadable expression, trying to understand if she had been saved, or if she had just traded executioners. Marcus lowered the barrel of the gun slightly, a gesture of de-escalation, but he didn't approach. He knew that to cornered prey, any sudden movement is a threat. He needed to de-escalate, but first, he needed to ensure the monsters wouldn't rise again. He pulled heavy-duty plastic zip ties from his tactical pocket. The phase of kinetic violence was over. Now began the phase of damage control. The veteran had won the fight, but the rescue of that girl's trust would be the hardest battle of the day. The dust of violence settled, but the tension in the clearing changed its nature. It was no longer the fear of imminent death, but the uncertainty of what would come next. Marcus moved among the 3 fallen men with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had performed this procedure hundreds of times. He didn't use metal handcuffs, but industrial plastic zip ties he carried in his vest, tightening the nylon around the criminal's wrists with a force that cut off circulation. He had no sympathy for them. Men who hunt children in the jungle have lost the right to comfort. The leader of the group, the one Max had attacked, was pale, holding his shredded arm against his chest. Marcus tore the sleeve of the man's shirt and applied a quick tourniquet, just enough to ensure he didn't die of hemorrhage, before facing justice. While searching the man's pockets, Marcus found a GPS unit, stacks of cash in foreign currency, and photographs of other young women. They were coyotes, human traffickers, the scum of the border. The cold anger in Marcus hardened his face even further, turning his expression into a mask of stone. With the aggressors neutralized and tied to the trees like livestock, Marcus finally turned to the girl. She hadn't moved an inch. She remained pressed against the roots of the kapok tree, knees pulled to her chest, her large black eyes fixed on him. Marcus took a step toward her, lowering his weapon, trying to look less threatening. But he knew what she saw. She didn't see a savior. She saw a giant covered in mud, with an ugly scar on his neck, holding a combat shotgun. She saw another monster, perhaps worse than the 3 he had just taken down. When he extended an open hand, a universal gesture of help, the girl shrank back violently, hiding her face between her knees, trembling like a leaf in a storm. Her silence was an impenetrable barrier. Marcus stopped. He knew that forcing an approach would only cause more trauma. He stepped back 2 paces and sighed, frustrated. He mastered the language of violence, but the language of healing was foreign territory. It was then that nature intervened through Max. The German shepherd, who minutes before was a war machine snarling and biting, perceived the shift in the energy of the environment. Dogs don't judge by appearance. They judge by intention and the scent of hormones. Max smelled the acrid scent of terror radiating from the girl. Without a single command from Marcus, the dog broke his guard posture. His ears, previously erect and aggressive, lowered against his head. His tail, which had been rigid, began a slow, low wag. Max walked toward the girl. He didn't run. He didn't jump. He crawled almost belly to the ground, in a posture of total submission, making soft sounds in his throat, noises that resembled a puppy asking for attention. Marcus watched, fascinated. That animal was the only living soul capable of transitioning between brutality and tenderness in a matter of seconds. Max reached the girl's feet and lay on his side, exposing his belly, vulnerable. He nudged his wet muzzle against her clenched hand. The girl raised her eyes, surprised. The gray monster that had devoured her captor's arm was now asking for affection. Hesitant, with a trembling, dirt-stained hand, she stretched out her fingers and touched the thick fur of the dog's neck. Max closed his eyes and let out a long breath, resting his head further against her leg. The tension in the girl's shoulders dissolved. She didn't smile, but she stopped shaking. She buried her fingers in the dog's fur, holding onto him as if he were the only anchor in a world that had turned upside down. Max had built the bridge that Marcus couldn't cross. Seizing the moment, Marcus knelt, keeping his distance. He pointed to his chest and said his name slowly. Then he pointed to the forest and made a gesture with his hand, mimicking a house or a roof. The girl looked at him, then at Max, and finally understood. She didn't speak. Perhaps trauma had stolen her voice temporarily, or perhaps she didn't speak his language. But she raised a thin arm and pointed north, toward the deepest, oldest part of the forest, where the rivers narrowed. Marcus nodded. He knew that direction. It was demarcated indigenous land, deep territory, where even the police hesitated to enter. The path would be hard, but now they had a destination. He stood up and looked at the 3 prisoners. He couldn't take them. They would slow the march and be a constant danger, but he couldn't leave them loose. He checked the bindings one more time. They were tight. They would survive the night if the Jaguar didn't return. Marcus took the trafficker's radio and placed it in his pocket. He would send the coordinates to the federal police as soon as he was far enough away to avoid being tracked. The justice of men would deal with them later. For now, the justice of the jungle would be their jailer. Marcus signaled the girl. She stood up, still holding on to Max's ruff. The dog looked at Marcus as if asking permission to break standard formation. Marcus just nodded. On this march, Max wouldn't be the point man ahead. He would be the guardian at her side. They left the clearing behind, the moans of the defeated men fading into the sound of insects announcing the end of the afternoon. The combat mission was over. The escort mission had begun, and Marcus knew that getting that girl back to her people would be more dangerous than any firefight he had ever faced on the asphalt. The march through the dense forest was slow and exhausting. The sun began to set, filtering orange light through the canopy, turning the jungle into a maze of long shadows. Marcus took the rearguard position, keeping his eyes fixed on the trail behind them, ensuring no one followed, while Max guided the girl up ahead. The child, who before seemed paralyzed by terror, now walked with a steady rhythm, one hand always brushing against the dog's flank, as if she needed that physical contact to believe she was truly free. As they advanced north, the forest changed. The loggers' trails and boot prints disappeared, replaced by ancient narrow paths that only those who knew the land would be able to find. Marcus felt the shift in the air before he saw anyone. The silence of the birds wasn't the fear silence caused by predators. It was the silence of observation. They were no longer alone. Suddenly, Max stopped. The dog didn't growl, nor did he assume an attack posture. He simply sat on the trail, looking calmly at the green wall ahead. Marcus stopped too, lowering the shotgun to a non-aggressive low-ready position, the barrel pointed at the dirt. He knew he was in the crosshairs. From the shadows of the vegetation, shapes emerged. There were 4 men, warriors of the local ethnicity, painted not for war, but for the hunt. They didn't carry ceremonial bows, but old hunting shotguns and sharp machetes. Their faces were closed, tense, eyes fixed on the white man, armed and in uniform, who was bringing one of their daughters. The tension was palpable, a wire stretched to the breaking point. One wrong move by Marcus, one bark from Max, and the rescue would turn into a tragedy. Marcus remained motionless, a statue of tactical calm. He didn't speak. Words were useless here. He just looked at the girl. She let go of Max's fur and ran, not fleeing, but returning. She threw herself into the arms of one of the older men who dropped his weapon to the ground to catch her. The embrace was silent, but the strength with which the father held his daughter said everything that needed to be said. Her tears finally came, washing the dirt and fear from her face, but still without sound, just the trembling of relief. The other warriors lowered their weapons but continued to watch Marcus with suspicion. They saw the tactical gear, the scar, the lethal posture. They knew that man was a warrior from another tribe, a tribe of asphalt and violence. The girl's father gently pulled away from her and walked toward Marcus. He stopped 6 feet away. He was a short, strong man, his face marked by the sun and eyes that seemed to read the soul. He looked at the mud on Marcus's clothes, at the dried blood that wasn't his. He understood. He knew that evil men prowled the border, and he knew it took a different kind of monster to scare them away. There was no exchange of money, no formal handshakes. The man simply placed his hand over his heart and gave a slight nod, a gesture of deep respect between protectors. Marcus returned the nod, rigid, military. The debt was paid, the scales were balanced. The girl broke away from her father and ran one last time toward Max. The dog, who usually didn't tolerate strangers, lowered his head and allowed her to kiss his forehead, right on the scar of his missing ear tip. It was a quick goodbye. She went back to her people, and the warriors vanished into the bush as silently as they had appeared, taking her back to the safety of a world Marcus would never be part of. Marcus and Max were alone again on the trail. The daylight was almost gone. The veteran looked north, where they had gone, and then south, where the criminals were tied up waiting for the law of men. He felt the weight of exhaustion hit him, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of guilt. He slung the shotgun over his shoulder and signaled Max. "Let's go home, buddy. Patrol is over." As they walked back toward the darkness of their own life, Marcus realized that the Amazon wasn't just a hiding place. It was a border post, and as long as there were innocents lost in those woods and wolves prowling the trails, the Sentinel would be there. He didn't need a badge or a flag. He had his dog, his honor, and an entire forest to watch over. Chan Utro, call to action, narrator. The jungle is a place where life and death dance every day. Marcus saved a life, but he also made powerful enemies. The men he left tied to the trees work for a larger organization, and they won't forget the man with the scar and the wolf dog. If you want to see the fallout of this rescue and follow the next mission of the Sentinel, your orders are simple. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We are building a community of guardians. Leave a comment. What would you have done with the prisoners? The watch continues. We'll see you on the next patrol.